We're all together. Yeah.
All right. Is it?
Yep.
Okay.
We're go, Colleen.
Are we go? Is it live on Facebook?
Yep.
All right. Awesome. Welcome everybody to our second panel discussion on uncomfortable conversations. My name is Colleen Conklin. I am vice chair of the Flagler County School Board, and I am co-moderating this discussion with Dr. Tim King. You have a wave, Dr. King, right there. We're thrilled that you could join us for this second conversation around unpacking your suitcase, identifying unconscious bias, and the roots of institutional racism. So before we get started, a quick introduction of the panel. And then Dr. King, if you would kick it off with giving maybe a description of what unconscious bias is. A lot of people don't know and are not aware.
So we'll start with the panelists' introductions first. So Ms. Hutzel, you want to start us out just with who you are?
Hi, I'm Ms. Hutzel. I am a literacy educator and current media specialist. I graduated from FPC 2007 and went to Flagler schools K through 12. I'm a mom and I taught English and I love to read. And I'm excited to be here on this journey with all of y'all.
Thank you. Ms. Irvin?
Hello, my name is Marion Irvin Redden. I'm retired teen court coordinator, native of Flagler County. And I'm excited to be on here talking about the issues that we're facing right now.
Thank you. Dr. Hyman?
Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Marshawn Hyman. I am a Flagler native, excited to be here. Educator, consultant, diversity leader, and excited to have a conversation with you all.
Good. And then last but not least, Dr. Pearson.
Oh, you're muted.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Phyllis Pearson, and I am actually delighted to have a conversation with everyone about tough topics. It's what we do. And I am a wife of 39 years to my best friend, Tony, and mom of 3 kids, and I have beautiful grandkids that call me dear. You know, not mud deer, but deer, which we love. So I actually spend most of my time working with youngsters. I am a Flagler County School employee and leader, educational leader, and have done this for 35 years now. And I don't intend to stop anytime soon, mostly working with the young people. And really this time is very important to teach them a lot about building their capacity, their economic capacity, their technological capacity, and the familial capacity, and to make sure they're ready for anything to come so that we can make the world an equal place to live.
So tonight we are going to be talking about our unconscious bias, sometimes referred to as implicit bias. And just to make sure we're all on the same page, unconscious or implicit bias are social stereotypes that we make about certain groups of people that are formed outside of our own consciousness. Typically it is built over time. Unconscious biases also have a tendency to be handed down through families or through different groups. One of the most common unconscious biases is one that happens on a daily basis, and a lot of people don't give it thought, and I will move outside of race because we will do a race in this conversation tonight, but that is the subject of women drivers. There are tons of jokes and memes that are made about a woman's ability to drive. But those conversations start with very, very young kids, typically young boys, hearing a man talk about a woman not being able to drive or park correctly. And then that becomes something that dwells in their thought process and something that they, without consciously thinking about it, start to hold as a belief that women are bad drivers or that women can't park. And that's kind of a great example for how unconscious biases work and they start to build. So you are very welcome. Our conversation tonight will be just a little bit different than last week in 2 ways. One, our conversation is going to be heavier. We're going to deal directly with race and some of those things that make us a little bit more uncomfortable to talk about. So like last week, I will ask you to give us a little bit of grace in this conversation. Everything that we put on the table tonight has been done out of love. If we say the wrong word, or if it is not intended to ruffle your feathers, it is intended for us to have a conversation that moves us forward. And then secondly, feedback from our last conversation was really good, but one of the things that came up was the opportunity for panelists to be able to answer questions. So we are going to just have 4 questions tonight. We've asked our panelists to answer, but try to keep them short. And then we should have about 15, maybe 20 minutes, depending on the time frame, at the end of the session tonight to be able to take questions. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat pod. We'll be capturing those, and then we'll be answering those at the end. I also want to give a thank you to Ms. Hutzel, who will be dropping a link of resources that you can access that will help you either build your knowledge or help you with conversations when we are really, really trying to walk towards building a society that is not built on racist institutions and thoughts and ideologies. So with that being said, we'll kick off our conversation tonight. And our first question is, what implicit biases can you identify that exist within your community or your organization? And I'll ask Dr. Hyman to start us off tonight.
Yeah, definitely, Dr. King. So the perspective that I'm going to add to this conversation is going to actually kind of build off of Dr. King's definition and example. As I reflect on my experience as a student here, I performed well. I received many scholarships for college. I had multiple jobs as a teenager, had a lot of support and advocacy from the folks in this community. And I say that to discuss this idea of internalized implicit bias and prejudice. I began to think, well, I'm earning these grades and I got these jobs and I'm going to these schools. Why aren't the other Black kids doing the same? I can do it. Why aren't they doing it? And I didn't realize that I was being tokenized. Right. And further, I didn't realize my unintentional complicity in my tokenism and my complicity in upholding institutional racism. Folks didn't support me because of my Blackness. They supported me because I was able to rise in spite of my Blackness. Right. And being proximate to me seemed to kind of exempt people from their contribution to institutional racism. So to kind of close my answer, I would say to the young Black men and women that are listening today, don't fall victim to being tokenized, but being the good Black amongst some of the white folks in this town. If you're receiving the support, that's great. Bring your friends and your family along with you. To the educators that are listening, think about that one Black or brown student that stands out in your mind, and then kind of reflect on what you love about that student, what they're doing, and how you can influence others in the same way. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Hyman. Any other panelists want to jump in on that? What implicit biases can you identify within your community or organization that you're a part of?
Oh, okay, so I thought Miss Marion was going to answer while she's working on her. Miss Marion, you're muted. There you go.
One of the things I can remember, and I have to go back to my upbringing here in Flagler, and I can remember the different things that happened, but more recent is standing with a coworker. Someone comes in to ask a question. Of course, the coworker is of the opposite race. And the first thing they do is go to that coworker and ask the question, thinking that they're the one in charge because they're who they are. And I'm not qualified to answer the question. That's, one of the things that I can relate to, as well as while being in school, not being routed or given the opportunities to look at avenues as far as college and things like that, because we were being routed into servitude types of learning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna leave that right there.
Ms. Hutzel.
I just want to add that, I see this from the education lens, and one of the ways I think our biases show up is in a lot of our policies, and sometimes in the things we read with our students. So for example, if we look at our dress code, for example, with an equity lens, right now, it's being proposed to add hoodies as a head covering that's not allowed. It's also delineates do-rags as something that's not allowed in our dress code. And as a white student at Flagler County schools from K through 12, I never had to shed any of my identity to come to school. And I do think that some of our implicit bias about what does it mean to be professional or modest or well-dressed comes from of racism and classism. And I think that there are places that have very much more equitable dress codes that serve more students. And I think that that's just one layer of the system that we could look at that would affect our children.
You raise a good point, and oftentimes we talked about this a little bit before. As a African American, some people feel like it's a compliment to come to you and say you dress well for a Black man, or like like it's not that you dress well, it's you dress well for a person of your color, a person who looks like you. And they do it from a genuinely, like, I want to be complimentary towards you, but that little end piece, unfortunately, sometimes it slips out. And you just kind of look at them like, wow, like, all right, so if I was a white person, would you not consider this to be nice dress, or would you consider this to be the standard? Most people who know me know I do my best to dress nice everywhere I go. What a lot of people don't know is that I've made a conscious decision to dress that way because of interactions that I've had with people in my younger life that really kind of shaped and said, almost like you have to assimilate and dress this way to be accepted. So when you dress that way and somebody says, hey, that's nice for a Black guy, it really kind of makes you think, man, like, man, I've tried hard not to be the Black guy. I just want to be the guy. But that conversation sometimes is lost on people.
I can relate to that, Mr. King. I'm sorry for jumping in before time, but
You're good.
I remember during integration, when I was among the first students to go through forced integration here in Flagler. And we were not allowed to wear anything that symbolized Blackness, the Nehrus, the African symbol earrings, none of that. We were told we couldn't wear it. And then one day, we were just talking because we always gathered around in front of the gym, and some of us got to talking. It's like, what does that got to do with what we're here to learn? And some of the guys got really upset and said, if we can't wear, what we feel comfortable in, because we felt like we were in a whole new world now. Why is it fair for them to be able to have their rebel flags on the front of their trucks, as well as their shotguns inside their trucks? So one of the guys went to take the flag off. And then that was the first time during that integration period that there was an uprising. And at that point, we were standing there and we were like, what's the big deal? We can't, so why are they allowed to? And they ended up with, guns being on the campus and all of this craziness. And it was just one of the situations.
Yeah, to some degree, Tim, Dr. King,
Mm-hmm.
We got over this to some degree, but I remember my brothers having longer hair than I ever did. It was called an afro. And I'm just saying, it's a symbol. And then what happened in the family is people began to twist their hair like the ladies had, like what you call braids. Mm-hmm. And some of them are all different kind of style. But when a guy, a gentleman, had the hair, they were actually from like the Caribbean or some cultural place that was just the norm. And so when they were trying to integrate during even desegregation, I remember this kid following Doug Karn. He's a famous singer guy, and he lived in St. Augustine. And that's what he did. I mean, he was always singing different types of music. And so people would relate to the music, but like disengage from the hair. It was like, that was like offensive. So I just, like I said, I'm glad my brothers wore long hair because they could fix my hair because I couldn't do it. You know, so you just appreciate, literally speaking, the talent that comes with art. Like hair is like an art. It's like an identity, you know, specialization actually for different people speaking quietly about themselves.
Good. And I'll close it and pass it over to you, Colleen, just with these two comments. Being able to identify unconscious or implicit bias within our community and within the organizations that we serve is important, because those biases strip away the identity of the individuals that make up those communities or make up those organizations. And then I'll just quickly address something that was in the chat pod. I got a compliment on an orange suit. That is true. I still own it. I wear it every anti-bullying day because we have a symbol for orange. Before then, I didn't have a good reason to wear it. I would just wear it because the kids liked it. But now I only pull it out on Unity Day. And so somewhere there will be some pictures of me with this bright orange suit on. All right, Colleen, I'll pass it over to you.
I think it was referred to, you were, that suit was fire.
Yeah.
It's really good. So I know right now there's a lot of discourse happening on Facebook. You know, everybody, it's very charged. So you have people put posts out, and then the next thing you know, you've got 50 people adding their commentary, and a lot of us are being faced with some comments that are really uncomfortable for us. And so the next question kind of addresses that. So here we go. When an implicit bias is identified, what steps do you take individually, personally, or as part of an organization to stop that implicit bias from continuing? And so, Marian, I think we're going to start off with you for that question.
How could I stop it?
Well,
one of the things I think,
that
first of all, to address it, to address that it's there, and hopefully have a conversation and make, if the person is not aware of what they're doing, I tend to call them aside and make them aware of what's going on and how they're making the person, how they may be making the other person feel, or how I felt about what was done or said. I'm not one that, just sits by and lets things happen. I try and address it. Having dealt with the young people that I did, one of the things I always told them, nobody is better than anybody else here, and we will respect each other for who and what we are.
Okay.
So
good. Thank you for that. And Dr. Pearson.
I think in any of our growth and learning, because that's what we're speaking about, we're talking not just educationally, but just as people. When I grew up, I had certain experiences. My best friend, quote unquote, when I was in 3rd grade, it was really my first experience with bias and racism. And I didn't know what hit me. And I've always thought of myself as a pretty smart girl and intuition, make sure you understand life. But at that point, I was just shocked. When she was around me at school, it was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, recess, all that stuff. And then one day we came out of church because, we went to Catholic schools, so church was a part of every day. And her parents were outside waiting for her. And she was talking with me. And as soon as she saw them, her face turned purple. I've never seen, like, she just instantly got ill and stopped talking to me, turned around and walked to the car. It was like, I'm a kid, I'm in 3rd grade. You have to understand, lost my dad, my mom was struggling. You got to put it all together in a story, but that was my opening eye. So I would say that you have to do what Miss Marian said and be purposeful about having those tough discussions, because I really still need to understand that. And I'm 60, right?
Right.
And I still love the person. I still don't understand it, but it was all about her parents' expectations of her, because on a daily
It's
basis, she
amazing
loved
to
me like a
think,
sister.
it's amazing to think there you were, a third grader, a young child, and you remember that. There was a level of pain there that you still hold on to and can recall. Caitlin, what do you think?
Well, I
know you're not
sorry.
shy about calling people out. So.
No, I like to phrase it more as calling people in. I've been called in lovingly over the years, even very recently, about my actions. And I think you have to lay, especially white people, you got to lay your defensiveness down and realize that this isn't about you and that this is about the harm you're causing someone else. So if you swing around in a circle and accidentally punch someone, whether it was your intent or not, doesn't matter. And if you've hurt someone, you need to listen and need to learn more. And personally, I do that by reading. I read a lot. I share a lot of resources. As a teacher and as a librarian, I do that by curating texts for my students that show more of the entire humanity of the people around them. That's my goal. I don't want my students to get to 12th grade and I've only read Tom Robinson and Othello and only know Black characters from trauma. So that's something that I've been focusing on as a literacy educator.
Very, very good. So very interesting. I wonder, when we're challenged with that, Tim, you had mentioned something about generationally, how, an unconscious bias can be passed down from one generation to the next generation. And that at some point, this generation needs to stand up and push back a little bit, right? And lean in and have that conversation with folks and not let it just slide or not let it just go and be ignored. Thank you. That was very, very helpful. Tim, you want to grab the next question?
Yes. Our next question is, have you ever said or heard someone say, I don't have bias, or I don't see color? What might you say to someone in response to this statement that would provide an opportunity for an intervention? And I will start with Miss Marion. Yes, ma'am.
Please. I can remember being a part of a group, and we were questioning why there were not more teachers of color in Flagler County. And I distinctly remember hearing this principal saying, I don't see color. How can you not see color? You have to dress every day. Color is color. But I from that point on, I could not trust anything that this person said. You don't see color.
When people say that, why do you think they say that? Why asking?
They're lying to themselves.
You think they're lying to themselves?
Yes.
What would their intention be for saying that they don't see color?
To put me off, or put whomever is asking the question off,
So
and not deal with the reality.
Dr. King, and then Miss Dr. Pearson.
So also, if we, when people say, I don't see color, it allows the biases or the views that they hold to not be accountable, that they're attached to the race of someone, which in the grand scheme of things really don't make it better, but it takes that lens away. So if I have some implicit biases against one group of people, but then I say I don't see color, or I don't see, and I'll go back to my example of women drivers. If I say, well, hey, I don't see gender, then it almost becomes okay for me to say this group of people are bad drivers, because now I'm not saying it because they're women. I'm just saying it because it's just a fact. And so it's a cover to be able to continue to believe what they believe. And in many ways, people feel like it absolves them from having to have that responsibility and really deal with it.
Yeah.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Dr. King. that phrase completely perpetuates institutional racism and allows things just to stay normal and continue as normal. And I mean, when I think of like the educational outcomes of Black students and Latinx students and even some of our Asian students, and we look at home ownership of some communities, we look at experiences in healthcare, we look at the criminal justice system. I mean, so many institutions that I haven't even mentioned, we see disparities across all those institutions consistently. And in order to actually figure out how we shift what's happening, we've got to see color and we got to see race. It's just that simple.
So true. So true. Phyllis, were you going to say something?
Backstage right now because today.
Yes, I think it's important, first of all, that there are many people walking around in their own subconscious. They are really not intentionally, but to not think about it, like for me as a teacher or for a doctor, a medical doctor can never not be a doctor. So as an educator, I don't get off work. Okay, this is my life. It's not like a career or something that people probably think I'm out of my mind for doing as much homework as I do. But in order to really understand and be able to apply my help other people to get to their best selves, you have to grow yourself. So you have to beg the question. It is impossible for somebody to look at me, and I'm just going to go in the family, like my mom's very fair skinned, and she really didn't belong, if you will, in the time of the 40s and 50s. You got to think about what's happened in Florida in the 40s and 50s in the South. She didn't belong and wasn't claimed by the dark-skinned people, Black people, if you will, African-American and all other Black and brown people. And she certainly didn't belong to a white race, even though on the spectrum, she was over a little more to, you know, the lighter side. They called them high yellow people, high yellow women. That's an insult. I want you to understand. It's not some kind of, you know, fancy thing about her hair was straight. She had lots of features like that, but her nose and her lips and other features were very obvious. And I want you to know that I think when I'm having a discussion with her that she was actually lost in her color, in her race, that people like she was invisible. And so I think that it just behooves us to ask the other person, not to assume that you know, and it's not from your perspective, but how's the other person interpret their own stuff? And then you learn from them, like the kids in the classroom. You can line them up, you know, like we line up by how we're going to retire and how many years we have left to go, that kind of stuff, or how many years we have put in as, and how much do they understand color and what did they see, like that little study that was done. You know, who means what to you is by what you were taught. And you can be as dark as the night or as light as the light. But the truth of the matter, how you were taught is how you're going to see things. And you just need to see the other side of it. So you can be full spectrum, especially as educators.
So it's very important. I think here's a good moment, right? If folks in the audience are listening or watching, that well-meaning people may think saying, I don't see color, I don't see any color, but not realizing that they actually are minimizing. They're minimizing. What I'm hearing from all of you is you feel minimized when somebody says that. It's not helpful to the conversation.
And I want to add, Colleen, I think that when we say well-meaning people, I think that we need to be more specific. And I think this mostly comes from well-meaning white people to say, I don't see color. And I know that that comes from not ever having to consider whiteness as part of their identity because it's not talked about. Someone brought up that question about why that conversation is hard. And I think that plays into it as well, that when you say you don't see color, you're denying somebody's humanity. And you're saying that you're denying part of their identity as they speak in front of you. And I think that is dehumanizing and wrong.
Right.
And I just want to add to the question. I've had colleagues in the district and teachers I know from other places say, well, I'm not biased and I don't think my school is biased. Well, it's pretty easy to pull up your OCR data, the Office of Civil Rights data. And the thing about systemic injustice is there doesn't have to be any racist people in the building or in the system to produce inequity. And so you can pull up Flagler's 2015 data and we can see that students are under-identified for gifted and for advanced programs that are over-identified for retention, and look at those numbers. And then sometimes I think people are either convinced by numbers or by story. So I think we need both.
Well, I think you have to target those things. You have to shine a light on those things, and then you have to target them and then try to improve them. So over the last 3 years, you've seen a rate of increase in those percentages for your gifted programs and for your advanced courses where there wasn't. But that was a very strategic, targeted goal. And the data doesn't lie. And when you look at the rate of expulsions and suspensions compared to the percentage of school population, you know, there's a disparity there. And so then you have to drill down into it and start to ask the questions, why? Why is that? You know.
Are you asking the students? Has anyone asked any of the students
Good point, Miss Marion.
the why?
You know what? I can't say that I have asked the students. I don't know if leadership has asked the students. Tim, you might have a better idea, or Phyllis, you might have a better idea, but I have not personally asked the students.
Yeah.
No.
One of the things, I'm sorry, Tim. One of the things that you want to
Go ahead, Dr. No, go ahead, Dr. Pearson.
But I spend the majority of my time in these 35 years, ever since I walked in the building, with kids. And the strangest thing is they can understand exactly what's going on. They may not be able to articulate or say it or speak it, but you try to get with their language about what curriculum is, for example, what applies to them, what they really understand. And I can tell you a perfect example of a model. Studying a little bit about IB and how they do testing and what counts as score and point. And all of the students in this club, if you will, this group of kids, they learn to be a family. And I use that because I spend a lot of time trying to figure out in my research, African-American students and Black and brown students that you wouldn't necessarily choose to go into AP and IB. That what they were when I first started out is they were in like honors classes, or they were in a program that was like a model program in Duval or St. Johns County, which is where I did my research. But the same thing happens when you listen to the kids. They will tell you, if they believe it, even if they're not performing, that they can do this. They just don't know exactly how. I mean, it's this weird thing like going into the doctoral program. If you ask Dr. Hyman there, you don't know the language of it yet. It all sounds very strange. Ask anybody that's gone to medical school or education beyond master's degree. They will tell you the same exact experience. And some of us just love research and we're kind of quirky and all that. But the rest of the world has to get in that mode of a system always compared to something else. And that's the part that most of us miss out on. We don't want to compare it to anything because we don't want to think that much. We don't want to go that deep. Ask the kid, and I ask all the time, and you'll get some true responses.
That's why I asked if anyone has asked the youth. I think years ago, they used to have what they call a career center. Do they still have those at the schools?
There's different programs
You would probably have to describe that a little bit more, Marion. We have a lot of things.
One of the things that I dealt with was we have, first of all, there not being enough people of color in our school system for our youth to have someone to look up to. Someone that they could possibly say, if Miss Pearson did it, I can do it.
So this is a great point, you bring up. If you look in our leadership ranks, percentage wise, we do have, I think, a good diverse population of administrators. When you look at our teacher ranks, I would question whether or not our teacher ranks do. I know that they don't, but I would say this: we're not alone. That's a national problem, right? So we're one of many who struggle to recruit teachers of minority teachers.
Wait now. I know of students that have graduated from FPC, applied for a job in Flagler, couldn't get the job. Now, I'm talking one young person in particular. This young lady went on to get her master's degree, and she taught AP history in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
AP history now in Volusia County, but was not hired in Flagler County. There's something wrong with that picture to me. There's something wrong there. If
So-
we tell our young people to go get educated and we hope they come back home, what's to bring them back here? What's to bring them back? Marshawn, you're in another county somewhere else, right? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
We've got to be better here in county and get rid of a lot of these biases, get rid of the people who are staying there holding on to those biases, and be about Flagler County. I know it goes on everywhere else, but if we're talking Flagler County right now, we need to do better. We have got to do better.
It is interesting to hear that. Go ahead, Dr. King.
So what I will say, or what I will add, is that representation matters. When you really want students to achieve and excel and be comfortable, they have to be put in an environment where they see people who look like them. And I think when you have numbers that are out of balance, there has to be a concerted effort, and you have to go and find ways to recruit those people. It's not enough to say that we can't. You have to find ways to draw. And I'll tell you, as a young Black man who had moved to Flagler, when I told friends and family that I was going to look for a job in Flagler, they say, "Tim, don't do that. They racist there." And I said, "But I live here. But I live in Flagler. And if I want to help change the city, like I have to be a part of the change that I want to see. And I can't keep driving 45 minutes away outside of the community that I want to build because I'm afraid that people are racist." And I made that move. Flagler was very good to me until the day that I left. Everyone hasn't had that experiences, but we have to make a concerted effort to really go and seek people. And sometimes that may mean we need to invest earlier to coach them, to get them to where they need to be. I'll go back again. I worked with what I think one of the best principals ever, and she had a really, really, really high standard. And so we turned away a lot of people, Black, white, it didn't matter. Like if you didn't meet that standard, they weren't going to be hired. And we had a conversation about the type of teachers that we needed, and we agreed as an administrative staff, sometimes we're going to have to invest in some folks and coach them up to where they need to be, because our kids need to see people in the building who look like them.
Right. And nobody's going to disagree with that. I know that Superintendent Taker, this was one of his goals, and he worked very hard on it. And I know that Jewel Johnson, now the head of HR, this is part of their strategic goals, doing outreach to Daytona State, doing outreach to Bethune-Cookman, doing outreach to a number of, to Stetson, to Flagler College, specifically to recruit the best teachers and recruit minority teachers. So I know that there's efforts out there. Do we have a long way to go? Sure, of course.
I think it might also be important when we do lose Black and Indigenous teachers or other teachers of color to do some honest exit interviews. I know a dear friend of mine was one of the best teachers I know, and we lost her to the Midwest somewhere. And I think she probably had some things to say about the way she was treated by parents and by administrators and by children sometimes as well because of race. And I think that we should be using that information to be better in the future.
100%. Yeah, 100% agree with that. I think exit interviews are powerful and should be part of any time somebody leaves the district, that we should be capturing that data, especially to look for trends. And that would show up, Caitlin, if we were to see some kind of a trend, to have a better idea. Dr. King.
No, I was adjusting the light. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Okay. I was going to say, I completely agree. I think we also should think about our retention of those employees. Sometimes we recruit folks and then they're just inside the same system, but what are we actually doing to change what's happening? And a lot of times folks of color will come in, they're recruited, they're developed, and then they are pushed out, right? Because of that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rashawn. Because I mean, you really, you can speak to that.
Mm.
And that feeling of retention and what efforts go into retention or little efforts go into retention.
Thank you.
So,
I agree with that because I know we have had other teachers of color, and for whatever reason, like Marshawn spoke to, they've either been let go or not. I won't say let go. We're not rehired.
Mhm.
And to me, that there's something needs to be looked at as far as why. Because when I interacted with them and when I listened to the youth, the young people felt like they were a great teacher. There was somebody I could talk to, because believe it or not, children are not going to talk to everybody on that campus.
yeah.
They will find someone that they feel they can trust. And from what I have been told is they won't talk to everybody because for whatever reasons, I talked to Miss Conklin about something that's, bothering me. And then the next thing you know, somebody is hearing about it outside the teacher's lounge. They're not trusting that way. And we've got to be better about claiming to be who we are. Don't tell a child, I'm an administrator, I care about you. Then you turn right around, go into the teacher's lounge or wherever, and you're bad mouthing them. You got to walk the walk if you're going to talk the talk.
Right. I see John Finelli made a comment in the chat box, and he's so right on the mark. It really is about relationships. It's all about relationships. And people remember how you made them feel. So it's really key. And I think one of the biggest things for any organization is to try very hard not to get defensive, right? Because the natural inclination is to get defensive. My natural response right now, right, is to want to rattle off all the initiatives and all the projects and da 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 da. But that's also not helpful, right? Some of this you need to hear it, own it, and then try to figure out how you can do better at addressing those situations. And so I think we've got one more question, and then we're going to try to take some questions from the audience.
We do. I will just throw out there, Flagler does have a minority recruitment team.
Yes, thank you. Anna posted the committee.
And so if you are interested, I am going to be sitting on that team. If you are interested in providing feedback and ideas, you can reach out to me. I can get you in contact with Dr. Blaine and that team. So our last question tonight, before we take questions from you who are viewing with us tonight, and I want to preference this. I'm going to preference this because this question deals with systematic racism in law enforcement systems, but also education. I want to preference this because we do not hate the police. And I feel like I need to say that because every conversation that deals with law enforcement seems to spin out of control. I'll ask that all comments in the chat be respectful. I know that our panelists will. So now that I gave that disclaimer, the question is, how do we address historical systematic issues of racism and injustice that happens in law enforcement and also happens in education? And I'll ask all of our panelists to be reflective and give us a short answer. And I'll start with Dr. Hyman.
Cool. I think the word that I want to reflect on is system. A lot of people think there's individual racism, which there is, and it's a system of oppression based on race and a system of advantage based on race. And if prejudice and bias were simply the root, how you felt about me and what you thought about me would not impact my ability to gain employment. It would not impact my ability to own a home. It would not impact my ability to really move forward and pursue the American dream. I'm putting in quotes right now. And because these things have happened and do happen, we've got to acknowledge that is a system. And that system is going to perpetuate without any of us doing anything, because that's what it's supposed to do. And specifically thinking about law enforcement, like that system allows someone to think that they can put their knee on someone's neck. And that system allows them to not be prosecuted without national pressure, right? It is a system that is interwoven in our society, and until we acknowledge it as a system, it's not going to change.
Thank you. Ms. Marion?
One thing in working with disproportionate minority contact and the racial and ethnic disparity group here in Flagler, I would want to talk with, law enforcement and well, I probably wouldn't be able to talk to them, but one question I have is, what would make you pull a gun on a young person without thinking about it? Scratch that. Anyway.
Isn't it fear? I mean, isn't there a root of fear there?
There's fear on both sides.
Yes.
Fear on both sides. I myself, I've never had it per se happen to me, but someone very dear to me had it happen to them. Not here in Flagler, but just driving down the road, get pulled over by the police. Before they can get out of their car, they get out the car, they've got guns drawn on them because you look like somebody. And if they had done their research, the somebody they were looking for was already in jail. We've got to be more, and as far as the law and goes, the justice system. I have seen instances where two young people get into a situation. The one of color could get suspended from school. The other does not. Or one gets 10 days, one gets 3 days. It needs to be equal, regardless. I don't care if mama knows Mr. So-and-so or daddy knows, it needs to be equal. Because if you allow one child to get an advantage, that child is not going to stop. I've had a child trip or kick one of my grandchildren. The grandchild kicked back. But who did they see? They only saw the little black boy kick back. Why was it not questioned? Why did you do that? No, they're ready to send him down, suspend him. There are things that cause things. And we need to know what's going on with these children, what's happening in their lives that make them react the way they do sometimes. I remember years ago, I said to somebody at FPC, you don't know what that child may have gone through before they walked into the front door that morning.
Right.
And this has nothing to do with color. It has to do with what's going on in that child's life. Something could have happened to them on the way to school and that hadn't happened to them before, and they just didn't know how to deal with it.
Right.
And the reaction, if law enforcement or administrators come at them wrong, the reaction may be one that this child never would have thought about doing. Now, with the justice system, if the black teenager gets charged, but there was another white kid or Hispanic kid or whatever right there with them, why did they all not get charged? It's got to be equal across the board for everybody. That is one way to start it. I'm not going to say that's going to be the cure-all, but it is at least one way to start. And law enforcement, y'all, some of y'all guys, if you're on here, you know we work together. I have nothing against the law. My son's father was JSO. So I have nothing against law enforcement. What I have, and I'm not one to say I don't see color. I am one to say I love everybody until you make me change my mind. So I just wish we could all see things. You don't know. One thing I always say on Facebook when I'm on there is we all bleed red.
Mm-hmm.
If you need blood, you're not going to ask that doctor if it came from a Black person or if it came from a white person. If you do, you're stupid. All you want to do is live. And I could care less where it came from, because if it's gonna help me, that's the life I want to live. I want to be there so I can help somebody else, because whomever's blood that was helped me. And my chore as a human being, as a Christian, is to be able to help somebody else because somebody helped me. And we don't know who we're turning away here. There's some talented young people in Flagler, very talented. And I'm tired of seeing them going down the drain, because once they get in that system, you catch holy heck getting out of it. And it's
come back from. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Tim.
Dr. P and Caitlin, I know we're pressing time, but I want to get your response to that question also, please.
Phyllis, you want to go ahead? You're muted.
Okay. I was saying, go ahead, Caitlin.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna come at this from the education lens. I think that we have to dream bigger than what we've seen. A lot of people think about reimagining education and fixing the problems, and I think that we do need to dream bigger than what we have. But one way you can do that just in one classroom is looking at what you put in students' hands. Are you giving them stories of all kinds of people in their full humanity, or are you only focusing on trauma? Again, I'll bring up that example. In high school, the only Black characters I read were Tom Robinson and Othello, and neither of those stories end well. And I didn't get to experience through literature the empathy that I needed to build as a young person. So as a literature educator, that would be my focus. Look at what you're putting in front of your kids and find ways to broaden that for your students. And you can do that from K through 12.
Thank you. Dr. Conklin, you were going to chime in.
I go ahead. I see Marion has her hand up. Marion, go ahead.
Piggybacking on what Ms. Caitlin said, we have got to start teaching true American history.
Yes.
True American history.
Yes, ma'am.
When I was in school, you would never have thought that a person of color did anything of value. It was not until, from what my parents taught me or what I learned at Bethune-Cookman, that I learned about what African Americans, Blacks did to make this country what it is. When we start teaching true American history, then we got something to talk about. Go ahead.
Marion, I just, in fairness, I mean, I know I was in the classroom years ago, right, in elementary school. Marshawn, by the way, was in my class.
That's what happened to him?
Exactly. Watch it. But I will say, I'll push back a little bit on that, because I know as an educator in my classroom, I did teach all of that. I shared all of that at any opportunity that I had. I will say that there are segments, whole, time periods, just in events that are just have been removed, that have not been recorded in many of our books. But I will say there are many educators that are out there sharing those stories and sharing history and sharing the great successes and contributions.
I just want to add something real quick to what you're saying, Colleen. I think, though, you can see the systematic problem here when we look at our African American history course in high school only counts as an elective. It doesn't count as a social studies credit for students to graduate. So when we think about just that on paper, sometimes one wonderful elementary school teacher you do what's right for the kids in front of you, but it has to be a systemic change to integrate history in the real way.
Let me just say about this, ask a question, the teacher thing going on here, but it addresses historical systemic issues. Most people don't even know the history of the Americas. I mean, I'm just going to say, because I lived in St. Augustine, it was like intriguing to walk down the street.
Well, it's all about who's telling the story, right?
Exactly.
It's all about who captured and is retelling it.
And you click back and you just look at things like this. I like artifacts. You go back to Black newspapers. If you want to know a story, you look at the regular published newspaper at the time. You go back to 1800 and 1600, and it'll take you straight to people that just came here, the Dutch and the French. And I'm from St. Augustine, and what it means to be a Menorcan, and all those families that had a lot of different identity. And we live in St. Augustine. Does anybody know that St. Augustine was a Black guy? Okay, African. And that's important but it's not taught that church to Saint Benedict the Moor. Does anybody know what Moor means? Do they know about Fort Mose and the Native Americans and the Africans and the whites were all kind of one people? If you think about the Spanish and how they went to like Nova Scotia. So if you're really kind of listening in because you're curious, that like piques people's minds if you're Black and brown, with all of the resources that were from Africa. And I ask these questions. This is how we can address it. What was before that? Like if we look back at 401 years and all we can think about is slavery, well, let's just go back beyond that. Because the majority of the people and the resources, the types of things we want people to kind of connect to the earth with, are right there in our faces, but we won't like look at it and see what it means to the systemic issues that we deal with, even beyond racism. Is like just getting along in a relationship. You don't ever ask about who you're talking to. You just make assumptions because we're kind of smart and we're in school and all that kind of stuff. But did you ever ask like about Phyllis? Who are you? I'm Mrs. Pearson. No, I'm not, but I am, right? So actually I'm a person. And I always tell people, call me Phyllis. It means love of flowers, and I'm allergic to them. That's meaningful, right? So don't bring me a bunch of flowers, but understand, who I am as a person and wholeness. And the older I get, the more I know that's important. Because if you broke all that stuff down, you probably wouldn't see my skin color then, because you recognize it, but look at my heart and look at what I do with kids and look what they do for me. And so that is to understand the person just right in front of you. You don't even have to look at systemic issues. Just ask the person, the how and why of it. Where did that come from? And they will tell you a little story. And then you can tell them your story. And then maybe we can get on a page. It doesn't really have to be a fight. It's a battles, because this is not going to be easy. It never has been, and nothing to do with where we are today, which is very much better off in lots of ways, but in lots of ways, we're staying at the privilege. No privilege really is earned. It really isn't. Your access to it is limited or not. And I go back to the three things. Economically speaking, can you go borrow a bunch of money, or do you have to put your stuff on 100 pieces of paper before they can approve it? That's a house, by the way. Technologies, do you even have access to technology? In this town here that we live in, I'm sorry, talking country, but in this place we live, there are people that we just found out don't have access to technology like the internet. And I know we're working on it. I've read about it, I understand it, but now we know individual families and people. So now let's do something about that. Let's think of the education and make sure that everybody has that equal access in this thing right here. They think they can do it. They think they can do it. And here are the resources that are going to help you get to it. This honors student, you can now go to advanced thinking. You can now go to IB or any other program, CTE program, certification program. And guess what? You get to choose. That's the fairness that we need to get to.
Good, Colleen. We have a couple questions that I were from attendees that I would like to get to. If you have the link for the bit.ly, you will see those questions there. It's just 4 of them, and I know we're pressed on time. So I'll ask the panelists to do your best to keep your answers brief. The first question is, what differences do you see compared to when you were younger in the school system when it comes to biases? So what differences do you see compared to when you were younger in the school system when it comes to biases? Any one of our panelists want to tackle that one?
There are, I've been out of school over 50 years. I'm a product of the Flagler County school system. There are some changes, but there's still more changes that need to be made. When I see young people, you know, I see people, when I talk to young people, I see and talk to young people that I know are gifted, and they need to have some way to, I would like to see each child, say, tested in some way. If the Army uses tests to determine which way they're going to send the soldiers, the school system should have a way to test. I don't know whether you do. Don't you educators jump on me, okay? Should have some way to test the young people to see, because everybody's not geared for college. If there's some type of test to see, okay, he's better or she's better hands-on, maybe they need to go into something with the technical field. Because let's face it, the average mind does not develop until they're 25 years old, and they don't know which way they're going.
But wouldn't that be a good thing for everybody?
For everybody, for what? To be tested?
You're proposing it, yes.
Oh, yes, I have been. I was. That's why I feel like it's something that needs to be done to find out. Okay, is Marshawn better in math or is he better in music? If he's better in music, we route him that way. And you know, I know other counties are, I'm sorry, Mr. King, but other counties are much bigger and they have these magnet programs. I'm not saying that we need to do all of that, but there's got to be a different way, because every child is not the type of child that's going to sit there and be a book learner. And they don't need to be put in special ed if they're just acting out because they're bored. That has happened here as well. We've got to find a way to deal with the energies that we're dealing with these young people. If it's nothing but put them in charge of something. Take that time away from them where they're fidgeting and causing problems in the classroom. Give them something responsible to do, something they can possibly relate to.
Good. Caitlin?
I'm sorry.
No, Dr. Hyman, go ahead.
I was going to just respond to Ms. Marian. I agree with the idea of taking a more proactive approach and figuring out kind of where students are and what they might need. I think I slightly disagree with the idea of kind of pushing them in one direction. We know that students grow over time and they change and have different interests. So I disagree with that point, but I do like your idea of proactively trying to figure out where we can place students.
I think back in the day, they did that tracking.
Well, and I want to say, I know that I was in the gifted program here in Flagler County, and from what I understand, gifted programs are still based on IQ tests, and IQ tests are notorious for being biased. And the whole notion of IQ is rooted in very racist ideologies. So how do we find students who are showing their giftedness outside of a testing situation, especially our minoritized students and our students who are left on the margins, and giving them access to these kinds of programs and making sure those programs are equitable? Because that's one of the most stark statistics on the OCR data, is that our Black students are way under-identified for gifted. And I've taught now 8 years, and that's just not true. When you meet children, you know that that's not true. So.
I can attest to that. My son was tested gifted when we lived in Missouri. When he came back to the Flagler County school system, you would have thought that they'd never heard it. He tested gifted in the Missouri school system, but in Flagler, nope. But that was fine. Because see, I was going to make sure he got what he needed to get anyway.
Well,
But
I do think it's interesting, the whole idea of tests and the simple fact that so many tests are biased. But then even just getting students to the point of being recommended for testing. We heard last week, a story from Sonia Matthews that talked about when her son was really young, and how she took her child to a private doctor to be tested and then came in with the results. Other than that, her son was not being recommended for the program. And so sometimes you have to look at the test and what you're going to use, but not every parent has the wherewithal to go have their child privately tested. So that is something that needs to be discussed. But some of this, I'm going to throw this out there. Some of this, I wonder, is that not a good practice for all students?
So, Colleen, I'll, if I may, panelists, I'll jump in and give you a response to that, and then we'll move to the next question. So, what I found, and I'll go to my background as a special education person. When we build systems that support our special education students, everybody in the room benefits. When we implement good instructional practices, and we say we're going to implement these for our students who are struggling the most, when we implement those with fidelity, we watch a whole class grow in ways that we would not have predicted. It's the same thing when we start talking about doing things that will specifically target our Black and Brown students, that will push them. We will see our whole system get better, because what you're doing is pulling a group that was at the bottom towards the middle, and it makes everybody else shift. And so I think that approach, I think having some kind of plan on how we are addressing the diverse needs of kids and some check-ins along the way, making sure that we pull evaluations that aren't rooted in bias, making sure that we're not relying on one score or two scores to make a determination on a kid, will benefit all of our students. And it's the same thing with discipline. When we really look at discipline and remove the lens of who's Black and white and just what are good discipline practices, magically our disproportionality started to dissipate.
Right.
And I to this day, I still get calls from people saying, well, how did you guys address disproportionality? Because we built a system that worked for all kids. And when we did that, we didn't have to then worry about it and say, hey, does this system work for our African-American students? We removed those things and just made a good system and put it in place. I know we're pressed for time. A question that was asked.
Tim, I'm sorry. Before we move on, I just want to, before I forget, one of the things that even started this whole idea of having an uncomfortable conversation was, and I wish we had gotten into a little bit more of institutional racism, the historical roots of institutional racism. There is a great movie, and I want to make sure that I mention it. Mm-hmm. It's called Uncomfortable Truths. It's on, I believe, Netflix. But it really gives a deep dive into the roots of institutional racism, into redlining and home mortgages. Phyllis had talked about that and just kind of touched on that. The documentary 13 talks about the prison system and how institutional racism exists there, and the policies that are in place that has just basically now put us in the leader of mass incarcerations of Black and Brown people, in our country. So there are some significant historical pieces that I don't think everyday people are aware of or understand or know. And so my hope would be, and we'll list it in the resources, links for those different documentaries. But I am, I've asked people when they share some of those things with me, please just sit and watch with an open mind and an open heart. Understand where this comes from, the frustration, the anger, and where it comes from. Look at the roots of some of the institutional racism that exists. It's not so much the policies of today, but these are things that have taken place over, the course of 70, 100 years, for a very long time. And they're so deep rooted now that it takes an awful lot to kind of peel the layers back to find out, where did this all come from? You know, how did this begin? And so those are just two documentaries that were just very well done and very eye-opening for me. So I wanted to be sure to share them.
At least you're paying attention. You're watching those things.
Mhm.
And it's opened your eyes to things that you probably never would have even ventured to think about, because it's not something that you've had to face.
Right.
Well, you know, it's interesting. My family are first generation from Ireland, from Northern Ireland, and they're Catholic. And so I grew up, you know, with relatives in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, that were very oppressed by the English government. No housing, no jobs, no opportunities at all. And there's a lot of anger. My family, there's a lot of anger on that side, just dealing with that history and knowing that side. So I empathize with, I think, where some of the anger is coming from. But I think people need to do a better job of educating themselves on where the roots of some of this comes from. And empathy is a lost, I don't want to say art form, but it is such a strong and powerful character trait that when you can try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, I think it really expands your understanding.
I think something you said that was really important, Colleen. I'm so sorry, Dr. King. Just you said educating. And so I think that brings it right back to the fact that we need to make big changes in public education. So our students are better educated about systemic injustice. They are not too young to talk about these issues, and recognizing the school to prison pipeline, because you can't talk about mass incarceration before you talk about dropout rates and the school to prison pipeline as well.
Which... It's so much more than just schools. Public education is not going to fix anything, everything. It's certainly obviously a place to start, right? And continue to address those issues. But last week, John Winston talked about just banking policies, just banking. You look at the financial sector and some of the bias that our country holds when it determines who it's going to loan money to.
And I would just argue that almost all the people that now are as adults going into these systems that need to be changed come through our system first. And that's why I think we have to focus on the way that we can change as a system. And I mean, we specifically public education, to raise people that go see those injustices and change them instead of following blindly.
But again, I think, and I agree with you 100%, but I think having these conversations, I think our kids are old enough, wise enough, I think, to engage in these kinds of conversations as well.
So I'm one of my jobs is to be the official timekeeper, and we're at we're at 1 hour and 14 minutes. So what I will say is to all the panelists, we are thankful for you joining us tonight. For all of you who are attending, who have registered and given us an hour and 15 minutes of your time tonight, we thank you for being a part of this conversation. Caitlin has just dropped again the bit.ly where you can find resources that will, again, increase your knowledge or help you in conversation. Guys, we understand that we have a lot of work to do, but I also believe that we're in the right place at the right time. We're primed for these conversations, and I appreciate the level of respect and the level of awareness that's been brought, and I look forward to change in our community, and hopefully that change we can push out to other places. I'll turn it over to you, Colleen.
I just, again, want to thank everybody, thank the panelists for an honest and open conversation. Sometimes these are not easy conversations. I think it's very easy to get defensive. I think we have to consciously work not to be defensive and be open to hearing and understanding and learning. Civil discourse is a good thing. Having conversations like this are good and productive. And so, I encourage individuals to do that. I'm very grateful for the panelists tonight. Dr. King, thank you always for co-moderating this with us. I'm looking forward to next weeks where we have another new panel, and that panel will be focused on creating solutions together. I said it last week, I'll say it again. I think that when we come together as a community, we can do anything and accomplish anything. And so I hope you'll join us in that final conversation. And once again, thanks for everybody joining us on Facebook Live, and to the panelists, again, appreciate you. Thank you very, very much. Everybody have a wonderful night.
Have a good night, everybody.
Take
Have
care.
a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Everyone.